try to stand in front of anybody. I'm Joy Miller, and I work with the Small Business Program, as do all of the other T-shirted people around here. Just wanted to say thank you to the staff for putting this event on today. Thank you to the guests who came to hear this message. Really happy to have you here. Yeah. We got a really smart team for you today. They're going to give you a lot of good information. On a housekeeping note, we are going to record today's session. So if you're going to ask a question later, we will give you a mic. If you need a restroom, just out this door, and you'll see men's and then women's, I think, just right here on your right. So, and please help yourself to more food if you want. So how many of you all are already familiar with the Small Business Program and its services? A few of you. Okay, so those who didn't know, we have all kinds of stuff to help you. We have classes that UT teaches, business classes just for small businesses. We have coaching services that are free. And I'm going to tell you something, our coaches are excellent. And if you were paying for it yourself, it'd be about $150 an hour. So it's definitely a huge benefit that we're able to offer you all as small business owners. We do events like this. We just try to cover as many needs as we can. So please consult our website and stay abreast of what all we're doing. It's smallbizaustin.org. And on the materials that are at your place, you will see our website listed, I think, somewhere on the bottom of each one. But smallbizaustin.org. All right. So I'm going to introduce our panel. So today we have Annelies Lottman with Texas Rural Cooperative Center. Annelies assists groups seeking to form or strengthen their co-op businesses all around Texas. So she is really a wonderful resource to be able to help you with some of the legal stuff around a co-op. She founded Yard to Market Co-op, a producers cooperative that offers sales and marketing services to small-scale food producers in the Austin area. We know that that's got to be in high demand. So thank you, Annelies, for being with us. We've got Dan Gillotte. He's the chief executive grocer of Weatsville. Anybody been to Weatsville before? Yeah. That food is from Weatsville. We tried to patronize a small business, and we love how they do catering. So thank you very much. This is one of the top-tier co-op groceries nationwide. Dan has led complex renovation and expansion projects. The one on South Lamar, I'm sure, was one of those. It's a very, very nice facility if you haven't been in there. He's the current board president of the National Cooperative Grocers. He's an active board member of the Austin Independent Alliance, Business Alliance, AIBA, as well. Next, we have Andrea Beleno Harrington. She's with Texas CBAR. She's an attorney and team manager for Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid's Micro Enterprises team. Let me see what else I need to say here. She facilitates small business legal clinics, providing community legal education on issues relating to micro entrepreneurs and small businesses, and she facilitates pro bono legal referrals. So we thank her for being with us as well. Yeah. And then last but not least, we have Andi Shively. She's with Key Figures. She's the operations manager of a worker-owned co-op providing financial management, bookkeeping, and tax preparation services. So each of these people has a unique perspective on co-op businesses and would be great resources for you to take away with you if you're thinking about starting a co-op, thinking about turning a business that you own into a co-op as you retire. There's all kinds of ways that you may want to engage in being a co-op, and these will be your experts. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Annelies, who's going to moderate for us today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, guys. Thanks so much. We are thrilled to be here. We were speaking as we came into the room just about how wonderful it is to all be on this panel together and to have the chance to talk to you all about the cooperative model and about all the different ways that we engage with that model in our different businesses and roles. So at the beginning, I'm going to give a brief presentation about what a co-op is, just kind of bring us all to the same place so we have a shared set of vocabulary that we're using as we go through the rest of the talk. And About twice a year, I give an hour-long version of this presentation, so you're gonna get the short and sweet version. If you have more questions, just holler my way after the presentation. I've got business cards in the back. We can dig into it. And if anything that I say just really isn't clear as we're talking through it, feel free to stop me and we could clarify. So the objectives for this short presentation are to know what makes a co-op unique, to recognize Texas cooperative businesses, especially cooperative businesses operating here in the Austin area, and then to know where to go for more information. The Texas Rural Cooperative Center, they are the entity that I work for. It's part of the University of Texas in the Rio Grande Valley. So most of the office is down in Edinburgh, Texas, and I'm their Austin office. And I work with folks who are starting up co-ops or making their co-ops better in Central Texas and a little bit in North Texas. I do everything but the legal part of starting a co-op. So if you want to do business planning, if you're wondering how to work with a board of directors or how to be on a board of directors, if you just need to understand the timeline or what it looks like to go through the co-op startup process, if you need to finance your co-op business. I can't finance your co-op business, but we can talk about ways to make it happen, and I can work with you through the steps of bringing your business idea into a real business that is thriving and ready to do whatever the thing is you want to do in your business. I also work with the Austin Cooperative Business Association, and that's really the group in Austin that is advocating for co-ops, helping co-ops to be more successful and to integrate with each other. So when a co-op house at the university needs to buy food for an event, they know to go to Weatsville because that's another co-op. So to make sure all the co-ops know each other and are working together in town. Austin Cooperative Business Association also puts on workshops and educational events. Similar to this one, we have a workshop series happening once per month all year long in 2019. And so I'll have information about the upcoming February workshop at the end of this presentation. But they're a tremendous resource, and the board of that organization is full of experienced co-op experts from around our city. So what is a co-op? A co-op is a values-based business that's owned by the people who use the services that the business provides. And we'll dig into what that means, but I want to talk about the values-based business part of it first. Because as Andrea is going to at least outline, maybe not get into all the nitty-gritty details today, but there are specific legal requirements to call yourself a co-op in Texas. But even if your business idea doesn't meet all of those requirements, you can still create a values-based business that really embraces and embodies all of these cooperative principles. So I'll briefly breeze through them. Again, this is a weeks-long course in and of itself. But the cooperative principles were developed in 1991 at an international cooperative convening. So these are international principles that are recognized by co-ops all over the world. Voluntary and open membership, democratic member-owner control, that's a big one that I want to flag. There's a democratic element to a cooperative business. Member economic participation, which often means that, especially if it's a worker-owned cooperative or a producer-owned cooperative, the members of that business are engaging with the co-op in order to earn money, so there's economic engagement in that way. But this principle really gets to the idea that member owners of a cooperative invest in the business. You're not just a member of a club, you're an owner of a business. And so you put some of your riches, some of your treasure on the line with that business in order to participate. There's autonomy and independence. That means a co-op isn't a subsidiary of another business. It's not owned by another organization. It's an independent business owned by the members. And then the bottom three in some ways reflect what we're all doing here today and have more to do with how the co-op engages with the outside world. So education, training, and information, that's a value that co-ops have. They make sure that their members are educated and they educate the community about co-ops. Cooperation among cooperatives, we share things with each other in the cooperative community, whether it's meeting space or expertise or whatever the thing is that our co-op does. If another co-op asks us to help them, we step up and do it. It's a really wonderful part of being a member of the co-op community. And then concern for community, that's really outward facing. That says, yes, we care about the members of our cooperative, the owners of our business, but we also want to make sure that we're living in a thriving community, neighborhood, city, region, state, all those things. Aw, it died. There it is. Okay, so I've used the word member a lot. I've also used member owner. Members are the people who operate, use, and invest in the co-op business for their mutual benefit. And this looks a little different depending on whether we're talking about a consumer-owned co-op like Weatsville or a worker-owned co-op like Key Figures, or a producer-owned co-op like Yard to Market, which I help to run. But at the basis of it is that the co-op is owned by a group of people, and that group of people get something they need because the business exists. A classic example is utility cooperatives in Texas. Are any of y'all living in a part like outside of Austin where you have a utility co-op that you rely on? A few of you. Well, most of the areas that aren't inside a major metro part of Texas rely on telephone and electric cooperatives to have telephone and electric. And the reason that happened is because Ma Bell, way back when, didn't see an economic interest, didn't see an economic value to bringing those phone lines out to the end of the road in the rural areas. And so people who lived in those areas worked together to build the power of their own masses to get the service that they needed in their area. A co-op really comes together because the people who are building the cooperative see a need and see a way to work together to fulfill that need. So in the case of a consumer co-op, that might be a need for certain goods or services that people can't access otherwise, or goods and services provided with a certain set of values or in a certain way. For a worker-owned cooperative, it might mean that the people who are seeking to own a co-op together work in an industry where their talents and skills aren't always recognized and rewarded in the way that they should be, or where people don't control the means of their own production, or they don't feel respected in the workplace. So a co-op is owned by the members. The members are the people who use and invest in the co-op business for their mutual benefit. And mutual benefit is really in there to remind us all that this is a group activity. A co-op is a group activity. And if you do not like group activities, you can create a business that adheres to many of these principles, but you might not want it to be a co-op. So why do people co-op? We talked about a few of these reasons already, but access to goods or services not otherwise available, keeping local resources in the community so that I'll talk about agricultural producers because those are a lot of the folks I work with. People come together to market the food that they're growing on their farms together so they can reach a bigger audience more consistently. So that instead of a grocery store needing to purchase produce from California, that grocery store might be able to purchase produce from a coalition, a cooperative of farms here in Austin. Commitment to democracy and social justice. As you can see from those principles, social justice and democracy are baked into the cooperative model. It is a type of business that is, in many ways, required to keep the needs of all the people that are part of the business in mind, because the members of the business have the power to turn the direction that the business is going in. The members of the business are the owners. And so if the workers, for example, are the owners of the business, that means it's really hard for that business to exploit the workers because they own the business. They have power in the boardroom. They have power to address problems within their own workplace. Build communities. You got to work together to be part of a co-op. And when you have to sit in rooms together or go places together and be a cooperative together, deal with problems as a group, you're building a community of people that can rely on each other for more than just the co-op stuff. Have a say in your workplace. We talked about that a little bit. There are some tax advantages to being a co-op, and I am not going to describe what they are because they are complicated and I am not a tax expert. But there are some, and they will be different for your co-op depending on what type of co-op it is. A key benefit that people get excited about and that is really inspiring and that I wanted to call out on its own is that the member owners of a cooperative have an opportunity to share the profits when a business is profitable. And if you think about it, that makes sense, right? They're the owners. There's nobody else for the profits of a business to go to. You're either reinvesting it in the business or you're sharing it out to the owners of the business. And so it's a really exciting way that I'll use the agricultural producer co-op example again. Farmers sell their produce to a co-op, and then their produce gets eaten. That's great. They sold their stuff. That was what they set out to do. But if it's a cooperative, and if that cooperative business is profitable in that year, the farmers might see an additional earning from their ownership of that business. And so their choice to sell to the business that they own benefits them, not only because they make the sale, but because they then benefit with a part of the profits. You may not be able to see those words, but I will tell you. This is a typical consumer-owned cooperative structure. Like, how does it work in practicality with a group of people owning the business? What I want to highlight is that what's usually not happening is a group of people is working together to make day-to-day decisions on how the business operates. Because as you can imagine, that is a recipe for chaos. So in most cases, a group of people delegates their ownership authority over the business to one or a small group of people and then manages that person's performance through the body of the board of directors. So this is sort of one possible structure for a co-op is you've got the big pile of member owners. They delegate authority down and to the right to the board of directors. The board of directors then empowers a general manager to do the day-to-day operations of the business, and that person hires all the employees of the business and does the business, and then reports back to the board of directors who evaluates the performance on behalf of the member owners. Here's another way that co-ops can be structured, and this might be more typical for a worker co-op. You've got the big pool of all the employees in the co-op, and then some of those employees are worker owners of the cooperative. Worker co-ops often have a probation period for employees because you don't know if you want to co-own a business with everybody that you hire right away. You might need a minute to see if they're going to be great co-owners with you. And then sometimes, depending on how big the business is and how folks want to do it, there might be an even smaller group, the board of directors, that's doing that's getting more engaged with governing the business. And then there might be a management team that's a subset or that kind of sits next to the board of directors and works together with them. That is just one way that it could happen, not by any means the only way. So let's talk briefly about the different types of co-ops. There are consumer co-ops, which means you buy something together. So those are purchasing co-ops. I also think of those as housing cooperatives because you're buying your house together or buying access to your living space as a group. And credit unions also, you're accessing banking together. Worker-owned cooperatives, you own your workplace. And then marketing cooperatives, you're selling something together. So here are some examples. Consumer-owned co-ops in the Austin area, they provide access to goods or services. They've got a commitment to values. Grocery co-ops and utility co-ops are really the emblematic examples, but you see Weatsville, REI is a co-op. It's not based in Austin, but there is an REI in Austin, so I put it on there. That's Guadalupe Valley Electric Co-op, GVEC, and Black Star Co-op is a consumer-owned cooperative that sells really great beer and food.
Delicious.
So delicious. Housing cooperatives, there are a bunch of housing co-ops locally. Some of them are associated with the university, and some of them are independent of the university, and grown-up people are living in them cooperatively, and it's real exciting. So some of those college houses and ICC are at the top, and then La Reunion Cooperative, which is an apartment building that is cooperatively owned, and so the individual co-op housing co-op members, do you call yourselves members? Ryan is from that co-op back there. They have like their own apartment. Sunflower Co-op, where folks are living in a shared house together, so they have their own room, but they share common space. And then that nice picture at the bottom, there's a co-op in development now called Boomers Collaborative that's for baby boomers to live together as they move towards retirement and beyond retirement in a cooperative place. So there's all kinds of creative things that can happen with co-ops. Worker-owned cooperatives, Equality Homecare Co-op, that's a cooperative of people that provide care to the elderly and to disabled people in New Braunfels. Fourth Tap is a brewery. Key Figures is bookkeeping. Andy's right here. Our Taco House Co-op is just getting started up. It's tacos, cooperatively.
It's the best kind of tacos.
Mm-hmm. Polycott Associates, they are web developers, right?
Yep. Yeah.
That's how much I know about web development. So as we talked about worker-owned cooperatives, they could be in any industry. It just means the people that work at the place are the people that own the thing. But the area where we see the most activity in worker-owned cooperatives right now is, on the one hand, in industries like domestic work, or there are a bunch of taxi co-ops that are popping up, industries where people aren't getting a fair shake as employees of businesses that are real top-down, and so they want to own the business to be able to control their workplace. And we're also seeing a really interesting growth in businesses that may have started as a sole proprietorship, just a single person or a couple running a business, a mom and pop shop. But they're getting ready to retire, and the kids don't really want the business, and so they sell the business to their employees as a cooperative. Marketing cooperatives, most of these are agricultural, though there are some artisan co-ops around, like people who do woodworking or screen printing could be a cooperative. And these are people that they might share branding, they might share a space, but the basic idea is they're producing something and they want to share the cost and challenges of selling that thing. So there are some challenges to starting a co-op. It can be difficult to access capital, which means because it's a business model that not all banks engage with every day, it might be a little more challenging to get a loan from a bank. It's not a nonprofit in the 501c3 tax exempt sense, so you're not going to get grants from or foundation money to start your co-op, even if it is a business that is going to benefit the public interest. So something to think about. There's a perception of complexity. You're working together with a group of people to make a business happen, and that can be really daunting for folks. I work with a lot of different co-ops around the state, and I do believe it's just a perception of complexity. You have to work with people even if you're starting your own business all by yourself. Starting a business is really hard, and if there's a group of people that has a really strong desire and reason to start a business together, it's great to do it as a co-op. If you don't have a group of people or you don't meet some of the requirements for a co-op, it's great to do it another way too. A co-op is only as good as the members' demand. If the members aren't engaged in thinking about whether the co-op is meeting their needs and giving the co-op information and feedback and demanding that their co-op meet their needs by attending board meetings, by serving on the board of directors, by giving comment cards if there's a comment card option, then the co-op's not going to get better. So you got to all the members have to be willing to jump in there. And startup can be challenging because it requires a lot of time and expertise and money and enthusiasm. And it requires that not just from one person, but from this team of people. And so there's this sort of and then at the end of the day, you're going to share the profits equitably among all the owners. So unlike a traditional sort of startup business where you've got an entrepreneur who's like, this is my $1 million idea, and I'm going to make $1 million. If you're a co-opper and you're starting a business, it may be $1 million idea, but that $1 million is going to be shared equitably among all of the members of the cooperative. And so it can be, just a different way and reason to start up a business. Very briefly, a co-op startup, the way a co-op starts up is exactly the way any business starts up. You have an idea, you move from the idea to start planning something, and then you take that plan and start to put it into action. If you have a group that's ready to start doing that, let's talk. We're not going to do the brief overview of Texas co-op laws, but if you want the slideshow so you can see this brief overview later, tell me. I'll send it to you. That's me. And again, I've got cards in the back, so you don't have to write that down. Texas Rural Cooperative Center. And the Austin Cooperative Business Association is on there as well. Their ACBA and the Rural Cooperative Center and I would say CBAR are the main resources for co-ops that are trying to start up and do things in Austin. But there are also cooperative things happening all around the country. And so there are national organizations that can be really useful. The National Cooperative Business Association, the Democracy at Work Institute is an incredible resource, and they have lots of free guides and webinars and materials online in English and in Spanish it's just a wonderful wealth of things. The Food Co-op Initiative, if you're thinking specifically about grocery co-ops, they're the place to go. And this is that event that I was talking about, and I'll bring this back up at the end, but it's on February 27th, it's during the day, and it's about bylaws, which are an important part of your co-op, and about being a co-op. So that, somewhat briefly, is the overview of what a co-op is and how a co-op comes to be. And now we're going to turn to our esteemed panelists. And what I've asked them to do is prepare a little bit just to we're going to go one by one, and they're just going to tell you all like who they are and what co-op they're from and a little bit the basics of the co-op. And then we'll dig in a little bit more to a couple specific questions about why co-ops are interesting and special and some of the key pieces about them. So, Dan, you are first.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So some of you ate our food from Weatsville Food Co-op. We're a two-store natural foods co-op grocery, consumer-owned co-op here in Austin. We are one of the oldest co-ops in Austin, though there are some that predate us. Housing co-ops, for instance, helped to start Weatsville back in the day. But we started in 1976. We expanded our Guadalupe location in 2009 and then opened our South Lamar store just a hop, skip, and a jump away from here in 2013. We have about 23,000 consumer owners, 230 staff people. I have a 9-person board of directors that I report to. And I think we do about $33 million in sales per year. We are one of the 10 biggest food co-ops in the country at this point. And we're part of the National Co-op Grocers Association, so a way that co-ops work together. A lot of the great success that we've had at Weatsville is from learning from other food co-ops across the country. We're the only one here in Austin, so we had to reach out and talk to our friends in Wisconsin and Massachusetts and California and learn stuff. But we work together. There's about 145 of us that pool our resources to have the benefits of a chain without being a chain. We're still autonomous and independent, but we work together.
Thanks. Andi?
Hi, Andi Shively with Key Figures. We provide financial management, tax, and bookkeeping services to all kinds of different organizations, both here in Austin and nationwide. We're a conversion. So I started out as a freelance bookkeeper and business advisor in 2014. And through referrals, started getting so much work that in 2015, I started hiring some other folks I knew who were skilled in the same area, who I knew through the cooperative movement, because I've been involved in worker co-ops for, 15 years or so now, maybe 10. We, from the get-go, kind of discussed the fact that we wanted to turn this into a worker-owned cooperative. So we converted in 2017. Before that, we were operating as a sole proprietorship, and we formed a cooperative together. And then I sold my sole prop to the cooperative that we had formed. And we've been growing very rapidly. That picture actually is from the month that we converted to a worker cooperative. There's 8 people in that photo right now, and there are 14 of us on staff at the moment. We are hiring a 15th. So it's been a wild ride of a year and a half.
All right, and Andrea.
Hi, I'm with Texas Rio Grande Legal Aid, and I'm part of some of our economic development work, and we work with the microenterprises team. We work with microenterprises. CBAR is known for working with nonprofit entities. And we've also worked with cooperatives for many years now. I will say that if you're interested in forming a co-op, please come see us first. A lot of the phone calls and email inquiries we get are after people are already in trouble. So think of us in the same way that you think of a visit to the dentist. Okay, you may not want to have that visit. It may be uncomfortable. We may ask you to have discussions with, and these guys can talk a little bit more about that, with your fellow cooperative members that you may not want to have, but it's a lot better than putting it off and then coming in for a root canal a year, 2 years, 3 years later. So.
Do you want to do anything with the next 2 slides
Oh,
right now?
yeah. So this is our mission, and we talked about this a little bit. And just touching on a couple of things that Annelies said, cooperatives, from my perspective, I view them as a word with 2 different meanings. One is cooperatives in terms of the movement, the philosophy, and the other one is the word cooperative as a specific legal entity formed under the laws of Texas. And so in the latter sense of the word, it is a tool. There are many tools for business entities in Texas, and without having a much more in-depth conversation, it's hard to know which one of those tools will achieve your needs. But you can have a collaborative, democratically owned and managed business that may not be a cooperative as a legal entity. So I think that the people that are up here can help you explore what it is that you want to do, and I can tell you what tool to use in order to achieve those goals. But there is the cooperative movement and the principles of cooperatives, and then there's this other meaning, which is it's a legal term of art. And so we don't want to get those too conflated, because it can become a source of conflict that doesn't need to be there. And then the other slide is that cooperatives are actually businesses, and there's lots of other things you may want to come and talk to us about that don't have anything to do with your business entity or with the cooperative principles that you're using to run your business. Particularly if you're going to go into a highly regulated industry like home health care, like groceries, stores, or food businesses, dealing with children, if you want to start a cooperative preschool or cooperative daycare. There are separate legal issues there that are really important to deal with from the inception. So that's my spiel.
Thank you so much. And we'll return to those themes, I think, throughout the day. Mm-hmm. Don't be afraid to get legal advice up front. It's great. So I want to talk first about the impact, why does it matter to be a co-op, to work together in this way? So I want to talk about the impact that being a co-op has on the management structure of the business, on how satisfied the workers are with their work, or how satisfied the customers are with their interactions, and with how likely it is the business might succeed. And Andi, if it's okay, I'll start with you down there for this one.
Sure. So in a worker-owned cooperative, there are tons of different ways that you can organize your management structure, ranging from being collective and making all of those kind of decisions together on a regular basis, to something that looks an awful lot like a traditional hierarchy. And that's actually what we do at Key Figures. Is I'm the operations manager, and I'm kind of in charge of running the entire business, and we have a supervisory structure and accountability along those lines. But the thing that's really different is that I'm accountable to a board of directors that is elected by and from our membership, which are the employees who I am responsible for hiring and managing and so on. And so what it does is it creates this accountability loop that dramatically affects our management style, I think. And you'll see any kind of business can invest in participatory management structures. You'll see that in all kinds of places. But one thing that's different about Key Figures, at least, is that it's written into our bylaws. We added actually 4 extra principles in addition to the cooperative principles to our bylaws, one of which was participatory management, and another is pay equity. So the highest person in our co-op can't get paid more than 4 times what the lowest person who's paid in the co-op it gets paid, which we are nowhere near 4 to 1, let me tell you. I don't even know that we've broken 2 to 1 at this point. So just that kind of like accountability being not optional, and that seeking of input from everybody has been a very big difference because of the way that we are structured legally and the way our governance operates. Another one in terms of worker satisfaction, I think the biggest impact that has is that we came together to make this business because we wanted to have good jobs. And so what that means is that we all want a lot of flexibility at work, and flexibility around our time and when we work and those kinds of things. So we've preserved that, even though as we've grown, I think other business models might not have held that quite so important. When we look at how we're going to spend our money, on a regular P&L, we look far less profitable than I think a similar firm would, but that's because we invest so much in our employee compensation and benefits. And every year as we approach the end of the year and we move toward the next and we're doing our budgeting and planning, we have a conversation in a staff meeting and kind of get everybody's input on what our benefits should look like for the next year and what we can do. And then in terms of the health of our business, I think that there are a lot of management structures, these participatory management structures, open book management, those kinds of things that are intended to get this kind of buy-in from your staff that really gets everybody at the table doing the best they can do, being an ambassador for the business, and thinking about the whole health of the business in addition to their own relationship to it. But again, it becomes baked into the system. We all have real skin in this game. We all have money at stake in our equity. We all have the opportunity to earn profits or not. And we have that kind of reputational relationship to our business because it's ours. And so I think those are some of the biggest differences in being a co-op.
Can you explain a little bit more about the equity stake that workers have in the business at Key Figures?
Yes. So when you're setting your equity stake, you've got to kind of look at a couple of different things. What are the capital needs of the business? And also what is both a meaningful investment so that it can't just be nominal. It's got to be something that really matters to folks. But by the same token, it's got to be accessible. And so we actually, this was one of our challenges, was coming to an agreement around what our equity stake would be. So we landed on $1,000 buy-in. So new members, as they're joining, can do that through a paycheck deduction. They have up to a year to pay it once their membership has been approved. And so that's kind of where we landed. We also have the opportunity to make further investments in the cooperative through preferred shares, which I have a feeling Dan might talk about quite a bit later. And honestly, the bulk of our equity in the business comes from preferred shares. We have far more in preferred shares from those who can afford to make that investment without preventing other folks from getting in. That being said, that additional investment in dollars equates to no difference in power in the business. We all still have one member, one vote, so that democracy is maintained.
And thank you for mentioning that. You know, that phrase, one member, one vote, is something that I didn't include in that initial presentation, but that is a huge piece of sort of the co-op ethos. That instead of having votes based on how many shares of the company you own, like you would at some traditional types of shareholder businesses, in co-ops, most often, if you're a member, you get one vote, and that's it, whether you own 8 billion shares of the company or 1 share of the company. And that's another way that co-ops stand out. Thanks for mentioning that.
You're welcome.
So Dan, let's turn to you on the impact of being a co-op.
Yeah, so I think some of the ways that a consumer co-op are special, and the reason why I feel lucky that I work for a consumer co-op is that while I need to make sure that we're in business for the next 40 or 1,000 years, however long we're going to be in business, I ultimately have to make sure that I'm making our customers who are our owners happy. And so that's kind of a really simple way to operate your business. Other businesses do it as a means to an end, which is to return financial benefit to their owners. In our case, at the end of the day, we, for most of our 42 years of being in existence, we've essentially measured, have we more or less met our customer and owner's shopper needs? And if we're doing that, then we're doing pretty good. And that allows us to be flexible in a way that other businesses maybe can't be. It allows us to focus on the things that matter to our owners, so livable wages, environmental decisions that we make about our product choices, because we're keeping and we're essentially we're trying to satisfy this group of owners who have kind of tell us over and over again in various ways what they want their grocery store to deliver to them, and so that makes my job easier in a way because all I have to do is make our shoppers happy. Easier said than done, but that's the concept. But it also does create an accountability for the board of directors and for me and my management team and my staff to make sure that we are living up to the standards that our shoppers want from us. And so there is this community aspect that we're not going to leave the neighborhood we're in because it would be more advantageous to be 2 miles away. Because literally the 1,000 people that live in our neighborhood are probably 900 of them are owners, and so this embedded quality that we have in Austin and our neighborhoods is significant in a consumer cooperative, I think. So that's a special aspect. I think it both creates an accountability, but it also creates a loyalty that is you can't beat the loyalty of owners to your co-op. There are co-ops across the country that probably really shouldn't be in existence. Like if you look at their profit and loss income statements, they're just barely hanging on, but they hang on because they're so resilient because their owners are invested and they will shop week in and week out. And so there's something in that model that's powerful compared to more traditional businesses that can have loyalty as well, but co-ops seem to generate this in an abundance. So,
can you talk a little about how the Weatsville's size, like how many owners you have, and if there are special challenges or special benefits to having such a large ownership?
Yeah, so mostly it's great to have 20,000 people who care enough to be part of your organization. That's pretty powerful, and they have all chipped in a small amount to be owners in our co-op, and so that. And they're literally, just like all the other co-ops, they're co-owners of this business with all those other folks. But I think it creates challenges in a way because we're a values-based business, individual co-op owners think that we need to fit their specific value perfectly. And so I need to balance the vegan, of which I am a vegan, with the fact that, a lot of people like to eat meat. And I need to tell the gluten-free folks that, people like flour, and kind of these balances that have to happen. And because we do a good job of living people's values out in a lot of ways, they frequently want to sort of raise the bar. And that can create some interesting conflicts and challenges. And because there's so many people, you get a lot of different, potential for factionalism and issues that arise. And so one of the stories I keep trying to think about is like, we have to think about the totality of the co-op. And I think one of my jobs and one of the board's jobs is thinking about that totality as opposed to the individual, the kind of strong tyranny of an individual or whatever, that idea that one or two people matter more than the total co-op. And so there's a lot of balance, and we surely don't get it right all the time, but we're shooting for that sense of the whole, and having some values that we really try to articulate that virtually everyone agrees on. So the idea that local, organic, and sustainable food is important. The idea that cooperative economy is important. And the idea that we want to make people happier, have a better world. Those things, I think, all 23,000 owners say, yeah, we're behind that. And so let's remember that we all agree on. And we can fight and argue about all the other stuff, but like, let's keep focused on that. And I think that's an opportunity that I'm telling myself right now to keep remembering. But also, I think it does clarify for people that we do largely agree on a lot of things, and we disagree about some things, but that's okay. Like, that's part of a democratic organization, that we're going to have some disagreement, and we try to balance those things. So let's meet the needs of the paleo people and the omnivores and the vegans and the gluten-free folks and the person that just wants to come in for lunch and have a Coke. Like, those things all can happen. So we're trying to do that.
I think that is such an important point about being comfortable with disagreement. So many of the strict and orderly documents and systems that you put in place when you talk to Andrea at the beginning of your co-op formation are there so that you can effectively disagree and it doesn't blow the business apart when the people who own the business have differing opinions and are very strong in those opinions. So that's great.
And if I can just add, I think it's an important initial conversation to have, because this process of disagreement and discussion is very different in a co-op than when you're coming from a traditional small business perspective. In a traditional small business perspective, the owner has the final say. That's it. There's no, there may be a disagreement, but at the end of the day, someone owns the business and they're going to decide. And that's not the way a cooperative works. And I think particularly when you have people coming together to form a cooperative who maybe have been operating as sole proprietors or individually for a while, that takes some discussion to get to a point of how you're going to resolve disagreements. And it's good to put that into your cooperative agreement or your cooperative bylaws, because at some point or another, going into business together in whatever form is like getting married. It's great at first. Everybody's happy, there's unicorn glitter everywhere, but sooner or later you're going to have a fight. And the business documents, right? Those boring 20 pages that you don't want to sit down and talk to me about are going to help you navigate through that disagreement so you don't blow up the business.
Yeah, I think one of the things on that is that we're always aware that we think of the not as a triangle of how ownership exists, but like as a hierarchy, because I think visually it's helpful for us to think owners are imbued with all of the authority, ultimately. They have delegated through bylaws, and then bylaws through policies to boards, and boards to me. Like, there's a lot of delegation going on, but ultimately authority resides in the owners and the members. And so having that kind of always remembering that, and then having structures so owners can have actual legitimate ways of playing that out, I think is important. But you have to balance it that you don't get a group of cranks being able to run your business also, because that can be a challenge. So you have to, in bylaw creation, there's really critical thoughts of thresholds, like how many people does it take to get something to happen in your business? What percentage of people need to vote to make something happen? Like, those things protect your business from the negative effects of a small group of people doing damage to your co-op. But then you can't have the thresholds be so high that that the owners can't effectively maintain that control of their co-op, that democratic control. So there's there's a balance, and I don't think, nobody's struck it perfectly, I don't think, but there's a balance. What's that percentage? What's that number? What's the threshold? And that's bylaws are kind of boring, but they're actually incredibly critical because they decide those things, and they literally tell you what are you giving the owners, what authority are you keeping in the owner's hands, and what are they delegating. So it's pretty important stuff.
That's why you should not just download them off the internet. Because these are decisions you should be making, right? Not just signing something that you probably haven't read.
Can I throw one more thing in since we're on this topic?
Exciting.
So actually, one of the most interesting processes we went through as part of forming the cooperative was going through the bylaws creation. And thing one I want to note is that there are some great templates out there that are built specifically for Texas law that CBAR helped Cooperation Texas put together. And I think the legal clinic at UT, it was a collaborative effort. So one, for worker cooperatives specific, those are out there. And what we did is we started with that template, and over a series of meetings, we went through one by one and really talked through every point. And people brought other things. We looked at other bylaws that other worker co-ops had put together. There's a whole resource available, a library through Dowie, which was on that list earlier. And we read through those to bring other things in. And so one, we ended up with really good bylaws, but two, going through that process together gave us the opportunity to build a culture of collaborative decision making. And I think, we are now better prepared to have a fight, not only because we have a good legal structure in which to navigate that, but because we've built this practice and this culture of talking together, really thinking decisions through before we move forward, and that has carried into everything that we do in our business.
Andrea, did you have anything to add to just that initial question of the impact of being a cooperative? Like, what have you observed?
Well, I think the cooperatives that I have worked with that have been able to continue being in existence, you see that there is, and let me preface this by saying that the folks that I work with are typically low income people from low wage professions. And there is an increase in financial literacy, there's an increase in soft skills management in particular. And so those gains in knowledge and in kind of the community IQ, the ability to reach out to licensing, to reach out to a local official if something's going on that you need help with in the public sphere, is really invaluable, right? It builds community capital that carries over to a lot of different arenas, right? And the other thing that you see is there is increasing equity in the business. So there is an attainment of assets. And while the client's never happy, but I'm always happy when someone comes back and they're no longer eligible for legal aid services because they now make too much. And so I think that that's really one of the key advantages of the cooperative model is that the assets, the control over the capital that the business generates stays with the workers. And that's in particular for worker co-ops. But it's also true of other types of co-ops that low-wage workers may engage in, or people in businesses with low overhead may engage in to grow their businesses, like the marketing co-op. It just allows you to leverage the resources of an entire group of people rather than going at it all by yourself.
So we've been talking about the startup process a lot, and so we're going to continue doing that. We're going to kind of delve further into it. And Dan, I'm going to start with you this time, in particular talking about, and this is for startup, but also just any time that your business needs capital for something. It's not just startup that you need a pile of capital. You might be doing other things. So I want to talk a little bit about how you raise funds in your business to do activities and challenges and how long it takes, kind of just get a sense of those pieces and how they've worked for your co-ops. And we're going to start with you, Dan.
Yeah, so Weatsville's old, so started in 1976, it was like, 100 people got together and, coughed up some dough and some concrete blocks and some lumber, and they opened a store. Can't do that anymore. You have to actually come into the market a little more professionally, and so it costs more. And so when we renovated in 2009, we needed to raise a significant amount of money. It's expensive to open a grocery store, a few $1 million to open a real live grocery store. And so the way that we did that is because our founders and a group of other cooperators in Texas in the 80s built into the state government this tool called investor shares, or it's also known as preferred shares. It's a tool specific to co-ops and specific to, it happens elsewhere, but this particular thing is Texas. And it's a tool that allows you to raise money through your members in a way that prevents you from having to get securities law and deal with a bunch of other expensive stuff that typical investment mechanisms require. And so as long as they're members of your co-op, they can invest in your co-op. There's some rules that dictate it. It's a little complex and you will need to get some help with it. But essentially, we raised $715,000 in just a couple months from our owners. We had about 8,000 owners at the time, and we raised that money from 165 owners. They get a small dividend, about 4% annually. That's your choice how you set that. But people aren't getting gigantically rich off the co-op, but it's a socially responsible investment that pays annually. In our case, you can set it up in lots of different ways. But it's a pretty powerful mechanism for raising money. We went back in 2013 when we were going to open the South Lamar store and raised another $1 million from another 111 people that are members of our co-op. And that mechanism is available to any co-op in Texas. There's rules, but it's definitely worth looking at. I'm not an accountant or an attorney, so I say that out loud, but it's pretty powerful. Black Star used it when they started. And the good thing about it is that you can have hundreds of investors, which you can't have really legally any other way without going through securities law and a bunch of other challenging expense. And it's somewhat more fraught. This is a very safe, well, it's safe for the co-op business approach, and it treats the investment as equity. So it doesn't sit on your books like a liability, like a typical loan. So there's some real benefits to that. Like, you're getting really in the weeds here, but essentially, it's as if you got a bunch of people who wanted to own this business with you, and they threw in cash, and that was their owner equity that they were putting in addition to the thousands of other owners that have put in smaller amounts, $55 in our case, to become an owner at Weatsville. But they were able to, like Andi said, to invest more, and they get a small return for that. And that's a special tool available to co-ops. It's really powerful.
Are there any challenges that you would want to flag with using that method, or with any kind of like accessing of funds that Weatsville uses that people should be aware of?
Yeah, well, I think Weatsville's, like I said, we're old, but I couldn't get a loan from a regular bank when I tried to, we were 30 years old and I couldn't get a regular loan from a regular bank. They did not know how to deal with us. They wanted me to personally guarantee it, which I probably would have if I had to, but it would have been insane. And we kind of practically said we weren't going to do that, and it was only because there's a national cooperative bank in the U.S. that we got funding through that mechanism. So that's good to know about. There are a couple funds out there that are for cooperatives. National Co-op Bank is one, or NCB is really what they're called now. Capital Impact. There's different groups that do fund co-ops, but your regular old bank, usually they're dumb about co-ops. And so that's a challenge. And so the investor share tool is pretty powerful in that regard. But I shook hands with 150 people and said, I'll get your money back. And so there is a personal responsibility that I feel every day that I'm going to return that money to those folks. So there's a reality of just that it's not free money. It's money that it's not technically a liability, but sure feels like a liability to me personally. So it's like there's some of that I think you just have to be aware of. It's not money to be willy-nilly with. It's money to really have a plan for. And I think for sure, you don't want to raise it if you're in some kind of downward spiral. You want to raise it because you are intending to build something and return it back to them ultimately. So.
Just to add to that, there are specific requirements for how the repayment structure can work for those shares under cooperative associations, but there are other options available if you choose another entity, for example, like an LLC. The thing you have to remember, and I think we touched on this in the very beginning, you can only use the word cooperative in your name if you are a cooperative association, if you are organized under the Cooperative Associations Act. But there's lots of other, as we were discussing earlier, there's lots of other C words. You can be a collaborative. You can be democratically managed with one person, one vote in other types of structures under the laws of Texas if the cooperative association isn't going to work for you because maybe of the demands of your investors, okay?
Yeah, that's a really important point. Like, just because you want to adhere to these values and principles doesn't mean you can't start a business venture with outside investors. You can do that. It just may need to be structured differently.
Well, you can do both. So we could theoretically have 30-ish other investors that are not part of this program. We haven't had to do that, but you can. So there's definitely ways to be creative about it as well. And then there's also patronage rebates that I don't think we're going to get into, but that's another consumer co-op benefit that the IRS, the federal government, bestows upon co-ops as a way of funding. So there are a few special things that co-ops have that other businesses do not have, which is why I'm an advocate for co-ops whenever I get the chance, like now.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I think just as a corollary, depending on what your business, what industry your business is going to be in, just be aware that just like Weatsville, going to a bank, banks are not the only kind of large entities that you're going to have to deal with that don't know what you are and don't know how to deal with you. So if you're going to be dealing with TDLR, which is Texas Department of Licensing and Regulation, with Health and Human Services, with any number of different agencies that you may have to deal with in order to get licensing issues resolved, they may not know what to do with you when they ask for your, what's the name of the owner, who's the person responsible for this license, okay? So just think about what other agencies or entities you're going to have to deal with, and take a look at the licensing application to figure out, and that may inform the kind of management structure that you decide on, depending on what industry you're in, because you may have to answer some questions in a specific way in order to fit a cooperative into a larger regulatory scheme.
Yeah, we had some conversations with the TABC, the Texas Alcohol Bureau Commission, because they're difficult, just to be frank, and they don't know anything about cooperatives. And so we've collaborated with Blackstar in trying to figure some things out. They didn't mess with us, but they were messing with Blackstar in a specific way that was going to be very difficult for Blackstar to operate. And we were basically able to give them advice and direct them in a way that was going to cover what they needed to in order to be legal with TABC. But if they didn't come to us, they wouldn't have had that, and they would have been would have had a really difficult time getting going. So when you're dealing with regulatory agencies, besides having a good lawyer at your side, finding another co-op that's in a similar business can help you figure out what they do, sort of draft on their work. That's one of the principles of cooperation, that we will typically help each other figure stuff out.
So Andi, you and Key Figures had just a very different sort of startup than the ones that we've talked about so far, because you were a conversion. Can you talk a little bit about that process and how you guys made it happen?
Yeah, it's specifically on the kind of funding and financing tip, or?
I would just pick whatever's the most exciting.
Well, I mean, I've already talked a little bit about our bylaws process. And really what it was is that, at a certain point, we kind of said, okay, the 5 of us are starting a cooperative, and we started putting a lot of unpaid time into building the infrastructure for the cooperative and getting it incorporated, getting all of our paperwork in order, coming up with a name. That took so many meetings. Coming up with a marketing plan and coming up with a conversion plan of, like, how do we market and announce this to our clients. So that was a lot of that process. And in terms of how we financed that, one of the biggest things we financed that with was our unpaid labor, which I think in any entrepreneurial context you often end up with somebody who like is just gonna make it happen, and it does, as long as they're like getting their basic needs met, they'll figure it out. And so we had a lot of that going on in the beginning. So I think that that kind of sweat equity was a really key piece to how we got Key Figures up and running. In terms of the conversion itself, how we financed the conversion basically is there was a lot of transparency involved, and I think that there's a lot of transparency involved in our business period, just kind of coming out of the nature of our ownership structure. But we kind of in-house negotiated a buy-sell agreement between the poorly named Andi Shively Bookkeeping and the very well-named Key Figures, whereby it was primarily owner financed. Like me as the selling owner, I basically financed the majority of it. And you'll see a lot of that in conversions with existing businesses, that you've got a departing owner who wants to see this this entity continue to exist, this thing that they've helped to build. They want to see that continue in the community after they've left, and so they're happy to be patient and help make that happen through a kind of longer process than you would normally see through during the sale of a business. So we structured it with both a combination of debt and equity. We did a 3-year term loan, and for a big chunk of what we felt the co-op should pay me for my business, which was mostly honestly tied to my unpaid labor during the time of the building of Andi Shively Bookkeeping, so that there was something worth Key Figures buying. And then the rest of it was the actual cash capital I had put in. We just converted that into equity in Key Figures, so both my $1,000 buy-in and $5,200 in preferred shares. And then everything else that we've done to make this happen has been everybody else's $1,000 buy-in, and then 3 other members now have bought preferred shares as well. And I'd say that actually access to capital has been, even though we are in a low capital requirement industry, like we need us and our laptops. We don't have an office. We need insurance. Like there's a couple of things we need, but it's not like we're buying equipment and fixtures for a grocery store. And even in that context, especially as we have grown, we've seen a lot of big cash crunches, just needing to have access to money in the bank to manage cash flow, even when we're profitable. And that has been really hard to get a hold of because, we are, let's see, there's 14 of us on staff, 6 of us are members right now. That's because we have a 1-year waiting period and we've grown so fast, so we want 100% ownership. So just the pool of people that we have available to purchase those preferred shares and put equity into the business is not 20,000 people, so that's a certain kind of limitation. And accessing loans through financial institutions has been a real bear. We ended up getting a line of credit through Amplify Credit Union, and even though they're a credit union, they still couldn't quite process us as a cooperative. I had to get personally underwritten, and I had to personally guarantee that loan. So right now, we're looking at friends and family loans as ways to fund our current equity, our current working capital needs, and eventually might look at working with something like a loan fund like Shared Capital, which is specifically for lending to cooperatives. And so they actually really do get it.
Yep.
So
That's who we have our loan with currently.
Yeah. And cash flow, I work with more than 15, maybe almost 20 different co-ops and groups that are starting up as co-ops around the state. And cash flow is a point of challenge for all of them. And raising, it's easy to conceptualize. You can make a list of what you need to buy to make the business happen. And it's really, really hard to have enough money in the bank so that you can pay your payroll even if the bills that are due come in after that date. Like that's just really, really hard to plan for as a small business that's never done it before. And yeah, it's a challenge to really be aware of, especially for a small business. We're gonna move to questions in a few minutes, and before we do that, I just wanna hear from the panel, do you have a key takeaway about co-ops that you wanna make sure that people leave this room with? Like, what do people really need to understand about the cooperative model that we maybe haven't touched on yet?
Well, I think that co-ops are special, and I think that the way I said is even the IRS thinks we're special, so that's pretty cool. And I think that community, like co-op and community, can be synonymous in some people's minds, and that's a strength in a way that people remember that we really are wed to the community that we're in. And I think that we have the benefits of a mom and pop, that we have that close to home, we know your name, we go to the same, our kids go to the school with your kid, like those things that mom and pops have, but we have the sustainability and longevity for generations that you don't have to count on, the mom and pop's, dumb kid taking the business on. Like we can, when I'm ready to, when the board's ready to have me go, they will find another general manager and they will continue, and the board will rotate out and we'll be around for, hopefully another 100 years or something. And if it was Dan's grocery store, I'm not sure my kid wants to run Dan's grocery store. So that, and like when your favorite business closes or changes ownership, how often does it go the way you want it to? And I think that's something that co-ops can have, that longevity of the longevity that a corporation has with the mom and pop feel that we love.
Andi?
Yeah, I mean, echoing everything Dan just said, I think that cooperatives, honestly, they can be harder to start because of all of these kind of external factors that we've talked about other institutions not understanding them. We had to fight with the Secretary of State. We had to get a lawyer involved just to get a certificate of incorporation that called us a co-op instead of a nonprofit. Like, there are these kind of barriers and difficulties, but I think that there are benefits to the model that are not available in other options, meaning not operating cooperatively, like the particular legal tool, that's a separate question. And that I think that those make us stronger businesses once we are up and running and help us be more resilient. And in particular, I think it's the touchstone of those cooperative principles that we talked about at the very beginning is really important. For instance, like pretty much every barrier that we've talked about so far on this panel running into cooperation amongst cooperatives has been a key part of that solution about, TABC doesn't understand us, what do we do? Well, we talk to other co-ops who've got the same idea. We need to start our bylaws. Well, we go look at other people's bylaws. So there's, touching base with those principles. Education, information, and training is another really key one in terms of our business being run well and governed well. It's really important for us to make sure that all of our members and owners and the folks who work with us understand what a co-op is. And so just continuing to touch base with those principles, those are the things that make a cooperative different, and those are also the things that make a cooperative successful.
Andrea?
Well, I heartily agree with my co-panel members. I think the strength and the community benefit to co-ops, from my perspective, is that they are a mutually beneficial form of business rather than an exploitative form of business, where you are extracting the profits from the labor of your employees and keeping them for yourself, right? In the cooperative model, the owners are benefiting from their labor or their patronage, however that is set up. The key takeaway, and I will repeat myself as long as I have to, is to remember that you can have a cooperative in the philosophical and principle-based model. You can have a cooperative business using one of a few different business entities available to you under the laws of Texas. And I just wanted to make sure that as you think through that those two definitions of the word are separate in your mind so that you can use the legal tools available to you to be really successful in this model of business. And they're going to be different for everyone. And so I just, I want to leave that there so that you can move forward with a cooperatively run business using whatever legal tool is going to be most effective for how you want to have it structured.
And I hope that you leave here knowing that there are challenges to starting a cooperative business, but there are people who are paid and love the work of sitting in a room with you and figuring out how to make it happen for your specific idea, like Andrea and me. And there are other co-ops all around the city and the country who will be delighted to get your group's call about the specific wonderful thing that they figured out how to do that you would like to use their model to make your business a great one. Cooperation among cooperatives is real, so there's lots of help out there. And in some ways, being this strange business entity that big players and organizations don't always understand makes that stronger, because we all know that it's tough to do this. So you can call us, call your fellow co-ops, and make it happen. What questions do y'all have? I see a question over there. There's a microphone. Here it comes. The microphone's coming to you. We'll just smile at each other.
We can't wait for your question.
We're so excited.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Good afternoon.
Mine is a simple question. I maybe missed it, but is there a cost to become a member of this co-op thing? How does it, is there a membership fee to get on, and if so, how much?
So typically, for any kind of cooperative that you might want to become a member of, yeah, there will be a member investment. So the reason we call it an investment and not a fee is that you are really putting your money in the pot with all the other members to have the right to vote as a member on member decisions. You're becoming an owner of the business and putting your money into the ownership pile. In terms of accessing help starting a cooperative business, the Texas Rural Cooperative Center doesn't charge any fees. The USDA funds us. Your taxpayers have already paid for that service.
Yay.
So yes, it's amazing. And yeah, does anybody have anything?
It just depends on what co-op you're joining.
Yeah.
You know, Andi's group, you have to be smart and numbers-based and get a job there, but then you pay in $1,000 after a year. Weatsville, you have to want to shop at Weatsville and pay $55. So it's like, just depends on the business. Black Stars, you know, something like that. And so different co-ops have different approaches to it.
Yeah, and every co-op will have its own standards for membership that usually has to do with what the co-op does and making sure that you also want to do what the co-op does.
Right.
Yes.
I have two questions. One is, so are co-ops by default 501c3s? Are they nonprofits?
That sounds like an Andrea question.
No, I mean, cooperatives, generally speaking, are for-profit businesses.
Okay.
Okay? And there's different legal entities under the laws of the state of Texas. So you're familiar with, if one person has a business by themselves, they could be a sole proprietor, they could be an LLC, they could be a corporation. So there are different types of entities out there. Amongst those are various types of agricultural cooperatives, and then there is an entity called a cooperative association. So, but these are all tools for people to move forward in this enterprise, right? But at the end of the day, they are for-profit businesses for the mutual benefit of the member owners. Okay?
Okay. So then my second question is, in the case of Weatsville, for example, there's, from what I saw in your chart, there's worker owners and then there's members, right? Are there two separate things?
Wheatsville is a consumer co-op, and so we really have consumer owners. So our employees can also be consumer owners, but they are not. They're not technically worker owners. We don't have that class. Black Star does, and so you can kind of do it any number of ways. But in our case, Wheatsville's a pure play consumer co-op, and so if you're a member of Wheatsville, you're a consumer member of Wheatsville. You may also work at Wheatsville if you get employed by us, but they're like different hats that we wear.
But Black Star has worker owners
there are what's
and
a hybrid,
members
and you maybe
and
wanna-
consumer members?
So Black Star is a consumer-owned cooperative, and they're democratically managed by a workers' assembly. So the workers at Black Star manage the business in teams rather than having a single general manager. But the owners and many of the workers, all of the worker owners, are also consumer members of the co-op,
Okay.
but the people who own the business are the consumers who buy food there. Yes, ma'am.
But there are some cooperatives that are multi-stakeholder cooperatives, where you will have folks who are consumer owners and their relationship and their use of the business is based on their, patronage and shopping there or buying things there, and also have another class of ownership that is based on working there. And the bylaws will control how profits get divided up and how votes happen and things like that. And then, so those are multi-stakeholder. And then at like Key Figures, for instance, we're a worker-owned cooperative, so we have worker owners. Not everybody who works there is a worker owner yet, but everybody who works there for a year is eligible to apply for membership.
And your customers are not owners and can't be owners.
Correct. We do not have a consumer or client membership class.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. My question is there a way to transform, let's say you exist in LLC with an active winery license to a co-op, or it's best to just give it up and start a new process altogether?
Why don't we talk after?
I think it depends is the answer.
That sounds cool, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
I think this question is mostly for you, Andi. So when you decided to bring on other people to help you run your bookkeeping business, why not just do an LLC? Because LLCs have a lot of flexibility in how you can define bylaws. So that people can buy in, and then you wouldn't have to go through some of the challenges of having an entity that's not, banks are not familiar with how to work with.
Right.
So I get the consumer model, but I'm having a hard time kind of seeing why you would do a co-op for workers owned versus LLC.
Sure, two reasons. Thing one is that I am ideologically committed to the principles of cooperation, and so I'm one of those true believers. So that's definitely part of it, but that's not a good business reason.
But I mean, that could also be accomplished in bylaws of the LLC.
Yeah, you can, but you can't. So there's a couple of things where I see advantages to cooperatives that are not available to an LLC. Thing one is collective retained earnings. In terms of creating a cooperative that will survive for the generations and well outlast me and my other founding members, part of that is that you do need to have some working capital that's invested in the cooperative that really belongs just to the cooperative in order to encourage its stability. With an LLC or any other pass-through entity, all of the earnings, all of the profits or losses at the end of the year must be passed on to the owners. They can reinvest them, but in the end, it's just a collection of owners as opposed to an entity that exists on its own. And that, for me, is a big part of that reason. Another part of that reason is, or another part of what I see as an advantage, does have to do with some of the tax benefits. So as a registered cooperative association, we are exempt from franchise taxes in the state of Texas. And so, you got to make, what is it, million and a quarter, I think, at this point. But I mean, we're not far from that at this juncture. And so, we get that. And then the other tax benefit that we have available to us is that our patronage dividends, our distributions to owners are taxed only once, which actually an LLC does provide, but like a C corporation, for instance, would not. But in the end, it's that collective retained earnings that is most important to me. One thing I will say is that there are folks, some cooperatives will start as LLCs for regulatory reasons, and also if there are owners involved who don't necessarily have documentation to be able to be W-2 employees, an LLC is a good alternative.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name's Jamie. I work at Treasure City Thrift Store, and we're a worker-run business right now, and we are applying for our 501c3 and rewrote our bylaws with CBAR, so thanks, y'all. I have two questions, one for Andi. Did you say all of your workers are your board, or the 6?
So, okay, keep my numbers straight. You have to have 5 people on your board as a minimum in the state of Texas on a cooperative association. We started out with 5 members. One of them left, so then we were down to 4 members. So we actually appointed an outside director to our board of directors. We now have 5 members and a 6th who is subscribing. However, we recently changed our bylaws, and as the operations manager, I am not eligible to sit on the board, which is a decision I support. And so we now have 4 members who are eligible to sit on the board, and we have appointed the board has appointed the 5th subscribing member. She'll officially be a member once she's finished with her buy-in to the board. So at this juncture, we can't actually have competitive elections. We don't have enough members who are eligible to serve, but as more members join the board, or as more workers become members, then we will have a large enough pool to hold competitive elections, or more likely expand the board size. When we first wrote our bylaws, we talked about going from 5 to 7 to 9 and then stopping there, and once we got to be not more than 9 members, then we could have competitive elections, but we'll just have to wait and see what the board decides to do as we grow.
And as far as holding you accountable, that board is who holds you accountable?
Yes, yeah, that is the official accountability mechanism, is that the board hires me, I report to the board.
Okay. And then for Dan, you mentioned the $715,000 was a dividend of 4% annually, and then you mentioned also paying it back. So is that 4% paying it back, or are you also paying it back?
Yeah,
Okay.
that's good. So the investor share system that we have is we have that chunk of money from owners, and we pay a dividend on it as long as they want to keep it in our co-op. Basically, there are put date and call dates. So like the owners can ask for it back at a certain point, and we can give it back at a certain point. There's a deal that we've made basically that's governed by the system. But we will pay that dividend basically until we pay it back to the owner, and that's a kind of mutual thing. Like most of that chunk is owners could ask for it back now, but they like getting the 4% dividend annually from Weatsville, and we like having their cash because cash flow is really important. But we could pay it down if we wanted to. We could have other people, and we have in fact, people have wanted their money back, and we've sold those shares to other people that already have shares. So there's some ways that you can kind of keep that money in circulation. But yeah, we're paying a dividend annually, and we will ultimately pay that back. Though the great thing about investor shares is if for some reason we're in a calamity state at the co-op, the board can decide that we are unable to pay it back. So there are prohibitions to having a run on that capital, which is really strong for the co-op. It's a little risky for the investor. So that's something to be super aware of if you get into investor shares. But it's super powerful for the co-op entity, like Andi was talking about. It's very protective.
Hi. So I really understand that this question probably has it depends very specific answer, but I still want to ask it anyways. In terms of maybe the businesses that are really excited about the co-op model and come and talk to you, Andrea, and you help them understand, philosophically, yes, but legally, entity-wise, no. What are are there common red flags or points that, that's a deal breaker? What are the most common reasons for people who come in with the philosophical enthusiasm but don't really make it all the way through legally?
In terms of forming a cooperative association versus something else?
Yeah, versus an LLC that has a lot of the bylaws and similar values.
Well, for startups, the by far most common obstacle is the 5 people. Because as both Annelies and Andi have talked about, it takes a lot of work, and that work is not paid. And it's very hard to find 5 people that are going to have that same commitment and time and resources to get there. So I think that's one obstacle. And it is not uncommon to see LLCs start up and then maybe see a conversion later on. But that's really the most common one. I have also seen organizations that have opted to go with an LLC model because of issues with investors and the limitations that the CA has on how they get paid back.
Are there any industries or business types that it's just really maybe the challenges are too much to overcome, or could technically anyone, any type of business really, with the right things in place, become a co-op?
There's always a way to get it done. I mean, the question is whether or not the individuals that are starting the business have the time and resources to devote to doing that. And that includes capital. And sometimes that's going to be the linchpin, whether you have enough money to get around the obstacles that you need to get around.
Well, yep. One more.
The esteemed last question.
All right.
Thank you. Okay, so then I'll make the most of it. I have 6 questions. Actually, I have 2. So are there any drawbacks? I guess my curiosity is geared toward becoming more of an owner member in this question. And so are there any drawbacks to becoming involved in multiple consumer co-op at any given time, or even a working co-op or working consumer housing? Are there any drawbacks to having my hands in a lot of jars in that way?
It is very likely that you'll end up spending time doing panels like this. End up on the board of directors of the Austin Cooperative Business Association. It leads to those kinds of things.
There are good drawbacks like those. Yeah. I think my view would be, consumer co-ops typically have the lowest threshold of entry. They're usually very little, some reasonable amount of skin in the game, but pretty limited. So, if you have $55 to put in Weatsville, and I think it's $55 at Black Star, that's the most you could ever be out. But if you want to, get a job with Andi, that's a different level of threshold, and housing co-ops have other thresholds. So I think it just depends on what you're getting into. But I think you could live in a housing co-op, have a credit union account, work for Andi maybe as she grows, be a member of Weatsville, eat at Black Star. All those things can happen with a pretty low risk. That's one of the great things about co-ops. Lots of people having a smaller portion. It's a democratization of wealth, actually. So a lot of us can be parts of lots of co-ops, and lots of us are. I'm a founding member of Black Star. I'm UFCU Credit Union. My mortgage is with them. My car loan's with them. So I think you can be in a lot of them, but it's just your threshold of comfort with what you can spend on equity, basically.
Okay, thank you. And then my second question is, if I, as a member owner, decided that I wanted to end or exit my ownership or business, what does that look like, or what are the repercussions of that?
Yeah, so for Weatsville, it's really easy because we have so many owners, and we have we get 30 or 40 new owners every week. We typically cycle out equity very quickly, so within a month you can get your $55 back, but it depends on the co-op. And if we were in a difficult state, we would not cycle that back out, so that's never happened, but it could.
Whereas at Key Figures, basically our bylaws control that, and I believe it's a 90-day payout. So if somebody resigns or is terminated, they would get their initial $1,000 member share back within 90 days, generally as fast as possible. I think we basically give ourselves 3 months to pay that kind of thing out. Any patronage, so the way we do our patronage rebate, which is our profit sharing, is we actually divide up the payout over 5 years. So if you've earned $1,000 in profit sharing, then you're only gonna get $200 the first year, $200 the second year, the rest we're gonna retain. That will continue to be paid out on the regular schedule. Just because somebody leaves doesn't mean they get all of their retained patronage right now. And anybody who has preferred shares purchased, those will continue to be governed by the preferred shares agreement. We have a minimum 3-year investment period. So if somebody came in, became a member, bought preferred shares, and then left 2 months later, they would still have to wait for 3 years before they could request their funds back. Now, the co-op could always decide to buy their preferred shares back faster, but in terms of requirement, we have the flexibility as opposed to the member.
And that's all in the governing documents, which is why it's important to have those conversations up front.
That's right.
Great. So yeah, it sounds essentially like in the best case scenario that whatever the buy-in is returned at some point, and then the rest of the logistics is in the paperwork and
Governing documents. Yeah.
governing documents.
Exactly.
Great. Thank you so
Totally.
much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think this was probably one of the best panels we've ever had. You are great. Thank you so much. We have a little token of our appreciation to give to you before you leave, but I wanted to make a couple of announcements to the group. One is when we send you a closeout note on this panel, we're going to attach an article about Weedsville that was in Forbes, I think Forbes Online, right? About how Weedsville is helping Austin's nonprofits. I thought you might want to just see how good co-ops can really be to each other.
Yeah. That's awesome.
$181,000 raised last year.
So
Terrific. That's terrific, right?
really cool.
Yay. And another quick one, if you know anyone who has a food or beverage, non-alcoholic beverage business that might want to talk to HEB about their annual Quest for Texas Best, we're hosting a session with them on March the 4th. Yeah, from 1:30 to 3:30. So grab one of these flyers on your way out if you know somebody and pass it on. And lastly, we'd love for you to fill out your evaluation form telling us how great you think this panel was, and also any future topics that you'd like to hear us bring to you. So be sure you do that and turn it in before you walk out. And thank you so much for being a great audience.
Thank you very much. Don't forget your